Former Singapore diplomat Professor Kishore Mahbubani has said that the United Nations Security Council needs urgent reforms and India should get its rightful place as a permanent member of the top UN body. He has spoken about the much needed reforms in the United Nations and said that he believes that the United Kingdom should in fact give up its permanent seat at the UNSC for India. The reason for telling UK to do that was that UK has not used its veto powers for decades, fearing backlash. He said that the United Nations must have the great powers of today, not yesterday, and called it unfortunate that no mechanism was created for changing the seats. We discuss now whether it is high time that the UN accepts India's bid for the UN Security Council, considering the fact that we are also the largest democracy in the world, and of course times have greatly changed. We'll talk about this with our guest. Joining us on the show at this point in time is Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, Dr. Chirayu Thakkar, foreign affairs expert, with us on the program as well. Mr. Surinder Singh Lali, international affairs expert, also joins us on the show here as well. Professor Nalapat, we've been down this road in the past as well, sir, but the United Kingdom obviously facing pressure not only from certain diplomats, but as a general thumb rule also, the powers that some of these countries perhaps paraded in the past are now fleetingly distant, and India, the country on the horizon with a large representation of humanity, needs to get on board. But unfortunately there is no mechanism, there is no law, there is no amendment that would allow for a revision of replacement of any of the P5 members.
I'd like to say, Vineet, that you and I, let's be real, and we acknowledge the United Kingdom is not going to give up its permanent seat on the UN Security Council, nor would any other. France, for example, they would be very hesitant. In fact, they would completely be opposed to the United Kingdom giving up its seat, because France would be next. So the fact of the matter is that's not going to happen. Now, the point is to expand the UN Security Council, the permanent membership, expand it maybe by 2 or 3 or so more members. And I've said for quite a long time, what India needs to do is basically show its hand and so demonstrate that the people who claim to be India's friends, are they India's friends? And if a country is against India, let that country be identified by basically asking one of the permanent members, or basically, that to have a vote in the UNSC about India's admission into the UNSC as a permanent member. And the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and the US have said many times they will support India. Each time, an Indian statesperson goes visiting, they reassure we support India. Now, the fact is China will not want India under any circumstance. But then let China be exposed that this country, an authoritarian dictatorship, does not want the world's most populous country, a country which is really truly representative of the global south, a country which now in purchasing power parity terms is the 3rd biggest in the world, that this country, China, is opposed to India becoming a permanent member. And don't forget, it was Jawaharlal Nehru who fought and fought and fought and fought for China to replace Taiwan on the UNSC. In my view, that was not a very wise move. It was in fact, but then Panditji was like that. In his own way, he was like a saint. And frankly, if it was a question of giving up a seat, the fact is that India was offered a seat. But Panditji said no, it should go to China. And he stuck to that. And I would like to say that while I disagree with that, the fact is that in his own way, he was a very saintly person. He was a very unselfish person. The only problem is when you run a country such as India, you have to be a little ruthless. You have to be knowing the power game. and handle it properly so that the country overall will benefit. And we would have greatly benefited had we been in the UNSC. So, but that did not happen. But we constantly supported China, even after 1962, even during the war. The UN representative of India was arguing in favor of China replacing Taiwan. That is the kind of behavior we have shown to China, whether it's WTO, whether it's environment, other issues. We have, for so long, we took on the same line as China. In fact, the Chinese hid behind us on many occasions, and we took the blame because we took a hard position, whether it's in WTO, whether it's in climate talks, other talks, and the Chinese, who had the same position, were silent, saintly people. They didn't talk, but we spoke. Now the fact is, it's time for us to basically call out China. And does China want the largest country in the world in terms of population, the third largest power in terms of purchasing power parity, a country that is a power in its own right? Does China want to exclude this member? And do the other four countries, are they sincere in wanting India as a member? So my point is, let's test that. Let's ask for a vote among the UNSC members, and let's see who's with us. All that counts, frankly, is a permanent membership. Let's be honest. The others are shifting sands. So among the permanent members, let there be a vote, and let each country say publicly, we are for India joining UNSC, and if one country says no, well, maybe, I don't think more than China anyone's going to say no, but the point is, one country should have the courage among the permanent members to take on this role. It can be the UK, for example. It can be France. It can be Russia. It can be the US. So I think, Vinny, that's the route we need to take. We can't expect the UK to back down, because the UNSC permanent membership is the one vestige they have of their former, imperial glory. They're not going to give that up. They're not giving the crown up. They're not giving all the panoply of power that you see in so many of these royal events. They're not giving any of that up. But they are not going to give up the UNSC seat. But let us test the friendship of the countries that are saying we are for India. And let us test their friendship by asking them to sponsor India as a permanent member. And believe me, we'll be forever grateful to them. And if a country is opposed to us, well, let all the 1.4 billion Indian people know which country that is, so that they can identify that country as hostile to India. Thank you, Vinny.
All right, great points there, Professor Nalapatha Mukherjee. Where do you stand on this? Would it be fair to expect or presume that the United Kingdom is going to give up its permanent seat, in order to make way for a country like India? We were selfless or altruistic enough to do that for China in the past, but that can't be expected of a country like the United Kingdom.
Well, thank you, Vineet, for having me on your show, and I'm sorry due to technical problems I joined 2 minutes late. Let me first explain the rules of procedure for permanent membership of Security Council. To admit a permanent member with a permanent veto or a 10-year veto or a 5-year veto, because there is no agreement on that, the General Assembly and the Security Council have to vote together behind closed doors, and the candidate country needs 2/3 majority in the General Assembly, and in the Security Council needs concurrence of all P5 members, which means that a single veto will knock out the candidature of that country. Under those circumstances, let me inform viewers through you that a reform process of the UN General Assembly already started when Minister Hardeep Singh Puri was PR New York. That went up to a certain extent, and at one point it was clear that India would get 2/3 majority in the UN General Assembly. So many years later, under Prime Minister Modi and our championship of the Global South, it is clear that it will get more than 2/3 majority in the General Assembly. Let me then turn to the Security Council. In the Security Council, there is support for India's candidature from 4 of the 5 P5 countries. The 5th P5 country, the People's Republic of China, has indicated that it can neither support the candidature of India nor the candidature of Japan, because in the negotiating group that was formed of the 4 candidate countries, which included Japan, India, Germany and one more, that was in the General Assembly also, we were told that they will vote individually for countries and India will get more than 2/3. Whether Japan will get more than 2/3 seems highly likely. Whether Germany will get more than 2/3, I'm not sure. But certainly that is the dynamics of the General Assembly. Even if the candidate country wins more than 2/3, as India surely wins, as long as China vetoes our candidature and has also indicated it will veto Japan's candidature, we cannot become a P5 country. In addition, there have been and are ongoing negotiations on whether if a P6 is admitted, let's say India, will they be willing, the Chinese for example, be willing to admit us with a temporary permanent veto? In other words, it sounds very complicated to a lay audience. The suggestion which was made, which India has not yet accepted, is that we become a P5 country, but we exercise our veto only for 10 years. Okay? That is not acceptable at the moment to India, because it then creates what is called in Indian Railways first class passenger, second class passenger, third class passenger. That is not acceptable to India rising power, that other P5 will have permanent veto for eternity and we will have permanent veto for 10 years. Let me now add that while I greatly appreciate Professor Nalapat's point about Nehru being a great man, I would like to, for only once, Professor Nalapat, do forgive me, because I'm a cynic on this. I'm a professional diplomat. There is no place for ethical considerations in international relations. If Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who is an ethical man, honest man, gentleman, etc., all the things that I am not, because I'm a professional diplomat, the Prime Minister of India should have first put, coming from the land of Chanakya, India's core national interest first. So when it was offered to us on a platter by the American president and nobody had an objection and it was China's seat, we should have occupied that seat, and then we would not be facing the kind of problems that we face all over, ill treatment of Hindu minorities, neighbors trying to act smart with us, always being told that what kind of major power are you? You're not in the Security Council. You are a sub-regional power. And then having invited the dragon inside with a silver tray, now that dragon says, "Thank you, elephant, but you will always remain outside." In my perception, that is not ethical behavior, because the country's national interest was not put first. That is, in fact, the kind of situation by which we used to be called the Hindu rate of growth, that was 2% every year before the reforms were put in. And that is the reason why many people still make fun of us behind our back, because they said a country that is not able to understand that you're being offered permanent membership on a platter and you're saying, please bring in our greatest neighboring enemy, China, which also doesn't accept Arunachal Pradesh as part of India, give them the permanent membership and afterwards let them stab you for the rest of your back till eternity, and they will make sure that India will never be the P6. If I may respectfully say, I think that Jawaharlal Nehru let down India's core national interests by playing on his personal ethics and not the country's core national interest. That's my perspective. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. I have written about it. I will carry this perspective till I die, that he made a very, very big strategic error.
Dr. Chirayu Thakkar, how do you respond to the points and the opinion that Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee has just articulated now in context to our larger topic today?
Vinit, good afternoon and thank you for having me. I think UN Security Council is a topic that I have been researching for 6 years now. In fact, usually historians talk about 2 episodes when Nehru was offered a seat, but I have, in an upcoming piece, academic piece, I have discussed many more instances in which Nehru was offered the seat, and I have been researching that instances, the 79 episode, the 93 episode. So I think I have dedicated last 6 years, and if I forgive me if I overstretch my time, but whenever it is done, do let me know. So there are 2 or 3 major things I would like to add to what Professor Nalapat and Ambassador Mukherjee said. First, going back into the history, because both my previous speakers spoke about history, we have been wanting into the UN Security Council since the day UN was formed. And remember, it was not Pandit Nehru, it was not the Congress in its current manifestation, but it was the delegation that was prepared by the British. And KPS Menon Sr. was their advisor. It was a 3-member delegation led by Sir Arcot Ramaswamy Mudaliar. And in one of his writings, they first went to London, and from London they went to San Francisco, where UN was getting negotiated. And from there, KPS Menon writes to Sir Olaf Carroll here in India that Indians are least interested in everything else. They are primarily interested in getting on a seat on UN Security Council. In fact, when San Francisco seat happened, there were only 4 amendments that were moved by the Indian delegation, and one of them was that we should somehow get permanent or a semi-permanent privilege there. So since then, we have been very keen on getting this. In fact, as one of my upcoming major archival-based academic piece is coming out, 1953, John Foster Dulles travels to India, May 1953, and says to Nehru that you please be on there. And if you read the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru, there's a letter where Nehru says that for me to be on the 4-Power Korea conference is far more important than getting onto the UN Security Council. So, and what Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee said, in fact, some of the finest Sinophiles of the day, they are saying that. I have quoted Jagat Mehta somewhere, and Jagat Mehta, who was Foreign Secretary, one of the best China hands, he said that goodwill alone cannot determine your foreign policy. So what Ambassador Mukherjee said, these things the professional diplomats are saying for very long time. But the fact of the matter is that we have missed the bus, we have lost the opportunity, and now we have to think what is going to happen. Now, since 1993, when Pranab Mukherjee went to UNGA and first spoke that India should be a member of the UN Security Council, it has been our consistent position. Ambassador Mukherjee also mentioned G4. So instead of advancing our own claim, we have put together a combination of 4 countries who were also aspirants. Japan is a part of that, Brazil is part of that, and Germany is a part of that. Now we are talking Kishore Mahbubani's current statement. Now, Kishore Mahbubani is not said this today. In fact, in 2016, for the first time, Mahbubani wrote a book chapter in a book edited by David Malone, who was Canada's representative, the way Mahbubani represented Singapore on UN Security Council as an elected member. And back then, he said that there should be a 777 formula, and there should be 7 permanent members of the UN Security Council. And back then he said that UK and France could rotate a seat among themselves, because since 1989 they have not used the veto. This is before my birth, and they somehow feel that they were the once upon a time of victors and leaders of the past order, but their current material realities of the world, they are not reflecting their power, and therefore they should refrain from exercising their power. That's a good thing. But will they give up? As Professor Nalapat said, that is never going to happen, that they are voluntarily willing to give up. And in that book chapter that I'm referring, Mahbubani has said that India has to use something that is called Hobson's choice. You have to force such a kind of challenge on the current order. And if you remember, although Mahbubani does not refer to, but when the Goa integration of Goa happened, our representative, I think Ricky Jaipal was India's representative in the UN, and he said Security Council or no Security Council, we are going what we are going to do. So I think
let me also get in Mr. Lali to respond to this. Mr. Lali, India, what does India have to do? What is that big event that India has to in fact manufacture to make this body realize that they need us there more than India needs them?
I mean, we need the fact that the Indian Prime Minister could go into a war zone and is in touch with both Ukraine and Russia itself is a good enough reason. But, I think Ambassador Mukherjee kind of stirred the hornet's nest. So, I mean, yes, I am fully in agreement with Pandit Nehru. But if we were to talk on those grounds, then we need to go back another 100, 200 years, where 100,000 Britishers came to India and ruled over 300 million, Indians. So I think we've been subservient for a while. So Pandit Nehru was probably one of them in the chain. But Vineet, While I also agree with Professor Nalapat that Britain is not going to be that naive enough to say please take the Security Council membership, because as it is, I don't think they need it, because in any case they're an American proxy, so if they have America, pun intended, they don't need to be there. But where is BlackBerry or Nokia or Kodak today? I mean, they're billion-dollar corporations that are nowhere in the scene. What happened? They didn't evolve. So I think the United Nations really needs to evolve, because the global geopolitical balance has been changing, be it the Indo-Pacific or South Asia or the emerging economies. There are a lot of now global activities going to happen here. So if India does not logically, in a very eligible manner, represent the interest, obviously the Western narrative for the longest time has been civil liberties and we need to minimize the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Is not going to lessen down, because India represents the global South, which itself is almost 1/4 of the, or maybe half the countries that exist on planet Earth. So I feel that we need to, the world needs to understand, and while I don't think that Britain is going to leave, but yes, there should be an expansion, and it should not be on the terms on which Professor Basmati said, or Ambassador Basmati said. One more point we need. I think America and the West is paying a big price, because when they created this monster called China, they should have also invested in India. I mean, of course, we had our own reasons, the coalition governments, but today the monster that they have created called China is now haunting them, and obviously there is a great global imbalance. So even for geopolitical reasons, or for balancing the world out, and the haves and the have-nots and the civil liberties in other parts of the country, and as we see that even elections are so much against immigration, so there is so much pathological hatred between the global North and the South, or people living in those countries. I think it's about time that the world realizes that we don't need to bring up India into the United Nations for the sake of India, but for the larger interest of humanity, because otherwise, Cold War II, as often says, already in full effect, and the world's going to get more polarized, and it won't be worth the place that I'm willing to, happy for my children to inherit. Beneath.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's take a response from Professor Nalapat on the comments that have made by our other panelists, including what Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee said.
Well, I admire the ambassador for a completely blunt talk, which is frankly, I mean, in my view, the opposite of diplomacy. But hooray for the fact that we have such sterling courage, and Ambassador Mukherjee represents that courage. So I congratulate other two. I mean, the excellent points have been made, quite frankly. But I'd like to say, Vineet, that this was a very bad mistake, teaming up with Brazil, with Germany, with Japan. From the start, I've been publicly opposed to it. I was writing against it. I said India should go it alone. For heaven's sake, our population is larger than all the other three countries combined. We have a greater say, we have a greater, frankly, right than all these other three countries combined. What on earth did who came up with this idea? Is one more of the ideas that, frankly, self-destructive ideas that we have come up with over the decades. So it's a mistaken idea. And I'd like to say, as far as rules are concerned, frankly, let's be honest. You saw Article 370 was removed. I mean, there was a feeling it was sacrosanct. Oh, it was there. It is a temporary provision. All rules are there for so long as the conditions exist. And when conditions change and rules don't change, that particular institution starts withering away. And the United Nations without India, Security Council, is a much weaker United Nations. I want to say that I have immense respect for the UNO. I am myself a UNESCO professor since 1999, and the UNESCO has been very good to me. And if I may say so, the work that has been done by UNESCO is sterling work across the world. So I'm proud of being a UNESCO professor, and I'm very, I admire the UN, but the reality is a UN Security Council without India has no legitimacy in the global South. And let me say that, with no legitimacy at all, and whatever it decides has no legitimacy. And let us go it alone. Let us test out the Chinese. And then the country that is really opposed to the global South will be exposed in full, and that, as the military expert Dr. Lali has said, Cold War 2.0. The Chinese are basically, the fulcrum of Cold War 2.0, and the CCP will expose itself. Let us expose them by doing this simple procedure, and let's not worry about the past. Let's work on the present for the future. Vineet.
All right, we've run out of time. Ambassador Mukherjee, would you like to quickly respond to what Professor Nalapat said, ma'am, and then we wrap up?
Yes. I would like to agree with him.
Last comment.
Teaming up with G4 was a very big strategic mistake, because India has far larger number of supporters in the General Assembly than any of the other three. So there was no need. And moreover, because we made a G4, so it was virulently opposed by Pakistan and UK in the General Assembly, and they formed a club called the Coffee Club to oppose specifically India's candidature, which also did not work. I also agree that since the UN Security Council has lost its legitimacy, and Mr. Mahbubani, having been PR of Singapore in New York, knows all the rules which I have just cited to you, he is either trying to be humorous or he is trying to make a fool out of India. I don't appreciate either, and I have no time for his proposal. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.